The heavy Mississippi sun pressed down with merciless intent, suffusing the air with a stifling stillness broken only by the distant drone of cicadas. The heat clung like damp cloth, saturating the earth and flesh alike, where thick vines curled around rotting fence posts and the dry ground cracked beneath the weight of unseen footsteps. Somewhere beneath the rough-hewn floorboards of the kitchen, where the cook's hearthstone still held warmth from the day's last fire, Hannah crouched, her breath shallow and measured, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The scuttling whispers of nervous conspirators brushed against her ears, words unspoken but laden with the gravity of terror and defiance mingled together. The big house towered not far away, its whitewashed walls glowing harshly under the sun's glare, shimmering with an almost spectral menace. It was a stark monument to power and pain, home to the very men whose cruel commands shaped the rhythm of her days and haunted her nights. The kitchen air tasted faintly of pine resin and cooking oil, scents that Hannah's memory folded into each breath, grounding her in the moment even as her mind wove through the past and future like a slow-burning wick. Outside, voices murmured with the sharp cadence of plans both fragile and fierce, plans that crept like smoke through the plantation's bowels. Among those murmurs was the gathering storm, an impending fury cloaked in the guise of routine, beneath the veneer of cotton fields rustling gently in the summer breeze. There was a pervasive tension that pressed in on every soul here, as tangible as the iron collars fastened around the necks of those who dared to dream of freedom. Hannah's eyes, dark and steady as river stones, flicked toward the plantation's edge, where the horizon seemed to distort with heat, reified by the distant clang of a metal hinge swinging open, a faint creak announcing a secret passage opening. What dread might such a sound foretell in this simmering crucible of power and subjugation? The day dragged onward, folding sweat and fear into a tapestry of silent desperation. The plantation's great cotton fields stretched out, bleached and endless, but it was here in the shadowed rooms and hushed corners that true battles raged. Battles mapped in exchanged glances and cautious steps. Recorded accounts imply the colonel and his brothers wielded their authority like the whip itself, an unyielding lash that echoed in the very walls. Their cruel decrees seeded quiet horrors in the fields and quarters alike, shaping every measured breath Hannah drew. She felt the weight of these unseen chains, not just the cold iron clasped around bodies, but the invisible bonds of fear and calculation that tied people to the ground. The sun's blaze was merciless, scorching both skin and soul. Would you dare muscle the heat for a chance at upheaval, when every shadow seemed poised to betray you? Hannah's frame tightened, fingers tracing the grain of the floorboards, worn smooth by countless footsteps, a tactile reminder of the lives crushed beneath. The voices grew louder now, edged with urgency. Conspirators paced between hidden patches of shade, their whispered words tangling in the warm breeze like tendrils of smoke. The kitchen's cracked window frames filtered the harsh light into jagged shards upon the cracked plaster walls, casting spectral fragments that seemed to tremble with every passing moment. The plantation clock in the great hall ticked with an unforgiving regularity, a silent judge marking the steady progression toward a reckoning. Here lay the heartbeat of a storm, a fragile plan, pregnant with peril, waiting for a single spark to ignite its fury. Each breath Hannah took was haunted by the question, what price would the fire demand before it revealed its truth? The day passed, sinking slowly into a molten dusk, steeped with a heavy sweetness and acrid smoke. As twilight crept through the treetops, the big house stood sentinel, its windows darkening like watchful eyes. Hannah emerged from her concealment, her movements deliberate and spare as she gathered wrapped bundles containing the rough iron chains, flint stones, and coarse rope carefully hidden beneath floorboards. Her heart pounded in contra-rhythm to the nocturnal chorus of frogs and cicadas, each vibration a reminder of the impending reckoning. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles crushed underfoot, blended with the faint burnt tinge of old ash. The ghosts of long-past flames whispered through the dense southern night. The weight of centuries rested on her shoulders, a choice forged in the crucible of pain and hope. What if the flames claimed more than the colonel's house? What if they consumed the fragile threads still holding this place together? The cool night air hovered around her like a shroud as she moved closer to the big house, its looming facade, a monument both to oppression and the silent defiance humming beneath the surface. The faint rustle of cloth along her arms and the steady beat of her breath formed a rhythm in the stillness, a quiet testimony to a measured resolve. Every step was a negotiation with fate, each creak of floorboard or snap of twig a sharp punctuation in the night's silent narrative. To lock away the colonel and his brothers, the men whose tyranny festered like an open wound, was to invite catastrophe, yet the fire kindled in her veins refused the cold comfort of caution. In this fevered moment, strength and vulnerability coalesced, flames dancing along the edge of reason and reprisal. The plantation itself seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that what unfolded would forever alter the fragile balance within its borders. The slow, deliberate tightening of shackles, the metallic clink reverberating in the cavernous hall, marked the crossing from whispered dreams to irrevocable action. The heat still clung, a living thing, as if eager to consume the sins of the past and cleanse the plantation with fire's unyielding judgment. When the first flicker of flame touched aged wood, an invisible thread was severed, binding fear to courage, silence to roar. The night embraced the unrelenting blaze, weaving smoke and ash into the fabric of memory, etching a new story born from old pain. Would you stand silent, or join the fire that burns not just wood, but the very chains of bondage? Hannah's hands trembled as she listened beneath the wooden floorboards, the murmured fears of her fellow enslaved lingering like a whispered storm warning. The flowering vines that clung to the edges of the plantation seemed almost to recoil under the harsh Mississippi sun, their leaves brittle and dry, much like the brittle spirits pressed under the weight of an unyielding hierarchy. It was the summer of 1859, the air thick with the oily scent of sweat and dust, a relentless smothering heat that made every movement slow and deliberate. Yet beneath this lethargic haze, a quiet tension bred itself, a burning desire masked by silence, a secret born in the shadowed corners where the overseer's whip could not reach. The vast plantation estate stretched before her, dominated by the big house, a cold, white monument to cruelty and power. The walls, sun-bleached and staring, kept vigil over the fields and quarters where lives were measured in labor and survival. But tonight, those walls would enclose more than just land. They would imprison the fears and fury of the oppressed. Sunlight spilled through the cracks above, falling like splinters of harsh truth across Hannah's curled form. She felt the rough splinters through the worn cloth of her dress, the coarse texture anchoring her to this quiet rebellion in the making. Above her, hushed voices traced the heavy air, plotting with a mixture of dread and fierce hope. The low hum of whispered plans carried beneath the heavy, cracked ceiling, the kind of whispered plotting that could either kindle unstoppable change or invite brutal retribution. Somewhere far off, a metal hinge groaned softly. The faint creak wove into the thick silence like a subtle herald of what was to come. Was it the slow opening of a door to a new world, or a deadly trap? Hannah's gaze lifted toward the big house windows, darkened like blind eyes that witnessed her every breath, yet understood none. She pressed her palm flat on the sun-warmed wood, steadying herself against the storm of fear and resolve rising inside. This night would ask everything of her. As the fireflies began to light the dusk outside, the voices in the quarters grew more urgent. Nearby shadows moved with restless energy, the soft shuffle of bare feet over cracked earth, mingling with the rustling clatter of metal, the sharp, chilling promise of chains. These were no ordinary chains, but those stripped from the anchor points of old punishments and worn by the wrists of those who dared imagine freedom. Rumors, recorded and whispered alike, told of the colonel's increasing cruelty, his command unwavering, his wrath legendary among the enslaved. It was said he tightened his grip in response to every murmur of unrest, every hint of rebellion snuffed swiftly in the dawn hours. But tonight, the fissures of fear would begin to crack wider. The sun's glare refused to soften as evening arrived. The heat, a lingering beast, nested inside the bones of the plantation's inhabitants. Would you stay mute beneath such pressure, or kindle the fire that might consume the very oppression binding you. The oppressive weight of the day's heat did not lessen as twilight descended. Instead, it morphed into a clinging specter that wrapped every tree branch and every palm of flesh in its steamy grasp. Hannah rose, her body moving with cautious grace, each step muffled against the floorboards, worn thin by generations of footsteps, carrying both dread and hope. Her fingers brushed the rough-hewn surface of bundles hidden beneath faded cloth, iron shackles scavenged from forgotten stores, flint stones for sparks, coarse hemp ropes, tools not of submission, but of uprising. Every object carried the residue of old punishments and new promises. The cool evening air held scents both sweet and acrid, crushed pine needles, the smoky trace of distant hearths, and the faintest echo of char-marked wood. Each inhalation filled Hannah with a tremulous strength. The night itself seemed to lean in, listening, waiting for the spark that would light the way from captivity. What if these flames licked beyond the walls of the big house? What other futures might burn away under their heat? With deliberate care, Hannah slipped from her shadowed refuge and approached the looming structure of the big house. Its whitewashed facades gleamed dimly in the moonlight, cold and unyielding as judgment. The scent of aged timber and oil lamps drifted from cracked windows, reminders of long nights ruled by silent fear. Her breathing slowed, her senses sharpening, the scrape of cloth against rough bark, the distant croak of frogs by the weeping willow, the faint metallic ring as her fingers closed around cold iron chains. Every step forward was a negotiation with fate, an act veiled in both hope and ominous weight. To imprison the colonel and his brothers inside their own fortress was a stroke of audacious defiance, a fiery rebellion harbored in the quietest recesses of long-suffering souls. The hushed tick of the grandfather clock inside marked a slow, relentless countdown. The plantation itself seemed to hold its breath, as if tethered to the very embers of this coming night. Would you stand in the silence and dare to set it aflame? The cold clang of shackles echoed off the vast wooden walls as chains were drawn tight, the metallic bite a sharp contrast to the muffled thud of heavy steps retreating down the hall. Within this cage of wood and iron, a storm gathered both outside and within. The relentless heat that had pressed on the land all day now fed a different fury, the slow, steady gathering of smoke and flame. When the first flicker sparked against aged beams, the air shifted, warmth transformed into uncontainable blaze, the crackling tongues of fire weaving destruction and deliverance alike. Smoke curled upward, swallowing the cold night, making the stars blink out one by one. Hannah's spirit, tethered to those flames, burned with a desperate clarity, resistance, rebellion, ruin, all indistinguishable in the searing light. Her hands, red-stained and trembling, let go of the last chain with a quiet finality. The fire was no longer hers. It belonged to every captive heart forged in shadows, every silenced voice waiting to roar. Would you step away from the flame or into history's blazing wake? The colonel's big house stood as a monument to both ostentation and harsh control, an imposing presence whose architectural grandeur concealed the brutality within. In the year 1859, the plantation mansions of Mississippi had become the epitome of antebellum elegance, blending Greek Revival symmetry with Italianate curves, the very language of power and wealth inscribed into wood and stone. This particular big house, rising 3 stories high, boasted a wide veranda edged with towering Doric columns, their fluted shafts catching the fading light like sentinels guarding centuries of suffering. Each window was tall and evenly spaced, fitted with heavy shutters that, when closed, turned the house into a cold, impenetrable fortress. Beneath the high ceilings within, the walls were adorned with intricate plaster friezes, their delicate patterns a stark contrast to the iron resolve of those ruling these grounds. The heavy oak front door, flanked by pilastered columns and crowned with a solid entablature, swung open with a slow creak that echoed through the cavernous entryway. Inside, polished floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers whose glass prisms shimmered faintly against the creeping dusk. The grand staircase swept upward like a frozen wave of dark mahogany, its balustrade carved with spiraling vines, a ruthless ornamentation that mirrored the entangled lives bound to this house. The atmosphere was dense with the mingled scents of lamp oil, tobacco, and old wood warmed by the day's lingering heat, a tactile reminder of human presence locked between these walls. The rooms were meticulously kept, each piece of furniture stiff and formal, bearing witness to countless dinners and gatherings orchestrated by the plantation's ruling family, a family built on the backs and bones of the enslaved. Beneath the mansion's opulence lay a harsh reality. The architecture itself was designed not only for comfort, but for control. The wide porches provided vantage points from which overseers and masters could monitor the enslaved workers toiling in the fields. Shadowed balconies ran along upper stories, their iron railings cold and unyielding as the gaze of those who wielded cruel power. The very symmetry and order of the big house was a physical manifestation of the plantation's social hierarchy. Each room, corridor, and doorway an imprint of the law that made human bodies property. The heavy curtains, thick and drawn tight in the slightest heat, shrouded the family's whispered counsels, plotting further entrenchment of control. Accounts indicate that the colonel, proud and ruthless, prized this house not only as a symbol of wealth, but as a cage to confine rage and reinforce dominance. In these walls of wood and iron, every creak and draft was a reminder of the fragile balance resting on fear. Would you see this mansion as a palace, or as a prison forged in white paint and stone? For Hannah, the grandeur translated differently, a looming specter of entrapment casting long shadows over her every waking moment. The cool marble mantelpieces, the glint of polished brass, all echoed against the pounding of her quickened heart. Beyond the velvet curtains and ornamental cornices, the true weight of the big house was in the denial of freedom, the chains that no architect could disguise beneath guilt or grandeur. Each step she imagined on polished oak floors was a step towards irrevocable defiance. In this house sat the colonel and his brothers, tormentors whose very bloodline was wrapped tightly around this building like thick ivy, threatening to strangle any seed of rebellion before it could root. And yet, like fierce insects trapped under glass, those seeds stirred. Tonight, the architecture meant for power would become the crucible of revolt, its iron and wood the instruments of the oppressed's reckoning. The colonel and his brothers were men known far and wide for their ruthless rule over the sprawling plantation and the lives bound to it. Their cruelty was not whispered about. It was carved into the bones of every enslaved person, marked by scars both visible and unseen. The ledger of that year is cruelly silent on many details, but oral testimonies and the broken remnants of slave codes paint a grim portrait. The colonel was a merciless man, his orders biting like the lash of a whip. His brothers, loyal in their quiet complicity and often mere shadows behind his storm, enforced a harsh regime of punishment. Branding, whipping, and torture were daily specters haunting the fields and quarters. They maintained an iron grip that tightened with every rumor of unrest, ensuring submission through fear and blood. The plantation was a theater of power, built on dehumanization, where every slave was a piece on a chessboard of control. The colonel's watchful eyes roamed the cotton fields, where stacks of white bolls swayed in the humid breeze, a stark contrast to the dark, aching bodies of those forced to harvest them. Below the surface of forced labor simmered a depth of resentment, so potent it seethed through stolen glances and whispered warnings. They called it the watchful quiet, but it was a tension as palpable as the iron shackles clinking on tired wrists. It was in these moments, the uncertain balance between silence and rebellion, that Hannah's resolve crystallized. Her heart bore the weight of countless stories, of mothers sold, of fathers beaten, of children raised within iron cages of fear. Yet, what charged the air that August was not merely a thirst for vengeance, but an urgent desire for justice writ in fire and chains. Hannah did not plot this defiance lightly. It was a decision born from the marrow of years spent navigating the razor-edged cruelty of the big house's masters. Every cruel echo of the colonel's voice, every scar branded on a neighbor's flesh, fueled a deep moral reckoning within her. Could she justify the act she was preparing? To imprison men, to burn their home, to shatter the foundation of an entire plantation? Would this blaze illuminate the path to freedom, or engulf them all in ruin? The ledger may be blank, but the questions pressed relentlessly against her chest, like the unforgiving southern sun. What law governed rebellion when the law itself was injustice? Hannah's thoughts drifted briefly to what awaited if her plan succeeded or failed. Accounts suggested that even whispers of rebellion summoned swift, brutal reprisal. Yet, the alternative was a slow death by chains, every breath weighed down by submission. In the dark corners of the plantation, she had heard stories of slow work, broken tools, silent sabotage, the subtle art of survival. But tonight, survival demanded more. The colonel and his brothers, with their smug certainty, remained blind to the storm gathering beneath their feet. Their cruelty was their weakness. Would you dare to turn the tools of oppression into the instruments of liberation, no matter the price? This was the moral crucible in which Hannah's desperate resolve was tempered. The field hands paused, and the distant cries of birdsong, a rare sound amid the oppressive season, flickered like a fragile ember in the thickening dusk. Hannah's breath grew steady, her fingers tightening around the cold iron chains beneath the floor, her spirit steeled against the heart's tremble. The cruelty of the plantation was measured in days, but what laid ahead was a reckoning long overdue. The colonel belonged locked inside the cold walls of the big house, constrained not by law, but by the righteous fury of those he sought to break. Fire would be voice, and chains would be justice. In the unseen and unacknowledged defiance of this night lay the first fragile steps toward freedom's dawn. The night swallowed the plantation whole, as Hannah moved through the shadows with silent purpose. Her hands, swollen and calloused, gripped the rough iron chains salvaged from forgotten stores beneath the big house, chains that would soon bind those who had once wielded them with merciless intent. The scents of pine sap, damp earth, and burning lamp oil wove through the warm air, dense and heavy as the silence that fell between each measured step. The manor's grandeur, with its towering columns and stoic windows, loomed above her as both fortress and prison, its walls steeped in whispered cruelties. Inside, the colonel and his brothers lounged, fat-bathed in arrogance and complacency, unaware that the noose of retribution was tightening within their very halls. The heavy wooden doors groaned softly as Hannah slipped into the dim corridor, the sound swallowed quickly by the thick velvets and tapestries that adorned the walls. Each echo seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken horrors, whispers of lashings, screams muffled behind closed doors, and nights filled with dread that stretched endlessly like the summer heat. The polished floors glimmered faintly under the lanterns, a cold reminder of the plantation's stark divide. Above, luxurious silks and the scent of pipe tobacco. Below, sweat-soaked linens and the bitterness of smoke. The colonel's footsteps echoed far too carelessly, a brutal rhythm that marked the slow cadence of tyranny. Yet tonight, that rhythm was set to break, replaced by the cold clink of shackles and the burning promise of fire. With a heart pounding in sync with the quiet unrest, Hannah fastened iron cuffs tight around the colonel's wrists, and then his brothers the scrape of metal against bare skin, a brutal hymn of defiance. Their surprise was palpable, their silenced curses swallowed in the fiery glare that now flickered along the walls. The air caught scent of smoldering pine and charred timber as flames suddenly licked upward, their crackling chorus tearing through the suffocating silence. Wood and oil succumbed quickly to the blaze, the fire's hungry maw illuminating the faces of captives and captors alike, a reckoning written in heat and ash. It was a violent punctuation to years of suffering, a moment where oppression was corralled into a consuming inferno. But as the fire grew, so too did the weight of consequence. Would liberation come through destruction, or would the flames devour all hope alongside the buildings? Smoke curled thick and dark, weaving through the hallways and choking the air as Hannah escaped into the night's embrace, every breath heavy with soot and determination. The plantation around her stirred in a frantic pulse, dogs barking, shouts rising, and distant footsteps pounding in urgent alarm. The big house, once a beacon of power, now smoldered with the fragile promise of rebellion unleashed. Yet the fire's roar was not victory. It was only the beginning of a longer, darker night where reprisals would soon spill over into lives and land. The ashes that would coat the earth in coming days would hold stories of courage and consequence, of risks taken at the edge of oblivion. Would the flames that claimed the colonel's estate ignite freedom elsewhere, or merely the harshest vengeance of a shattered world? The night air thickened with the acrid scent of smoke and the heavy press of nearing chaos. The big house, once a sanctuary of arrogant dominion, now festered with a fury swollen from years of silent suffering beneath its stately columns. Hannah moved with fierce determination, her breath steady despite the pounding storm within her chest. The iron chains clattered cold and menacing in her hands as she advanced toward the door of the colonel's quarters. Inside, the colonel and his brothers, symbols of untamed cruelty, were bound by a sudden captivity they could neither anticipate nor escape. Their fury, caged and impotent, simmered beneath the harsh light of flickering flames that began to edge their way along the ancient woodwork. The crackle of fire was a savage incantation, filled with a paradoxical promise of both destruction and liberation. The walls soaked in heat and light, eager to swallow cold certainty in a blaze that roared with the unspoken voices of countless oppressed souls. Each snap and pop of flaming timber reverberated like the echo of long-silenced screams, a chorus rising against the silence enforced by plantation law. The slow burn consumed tapestries, heavy with dust and memory, releasing a choking perfume that clung to the thick southern air. Flickering shadows danced grotesquely across the walls, contorting familiar shapes into monsters born from years of brutality. The colonel's furious shouts dissolved into coughs, rage rendered impotent as the flames consumed the room where power had once ruled supreme. Outside, alarm shattered the night. Shouts cut through the heavy darkness, punctuated by the pounding of frantic footsteps over dirt and broken twigs. The plantation was awakening to chaos, not the slow, drawn-out oppression of everyday life, but the sudden eruption of revolt. Dogs bayed, their cries splitting the thick smoke as enslaved men and women scattered in a fracturing tide of terror and hope. Hannah's heart hammered fiercely, each beat a drum signaling the irreversible shift of fate. The fire, once a flickering secret of defiance, had become a roaring declaration against chains and silence. Yet the smoke was still dense with uncertainty. Would its brightness guide a path to freedom or blind them all to ruin? The night held its breath. The reprisal was swift. Whips cracked like thunderclaps against flesh. Hands were bound with fresh chains, and faces were bruised in the fevered hunt for rebels. Survival now demanded stealth deeper than before, the glare of fire replaced by the cold, cautious watchfulness of fear. The heirs of the colonel's cruelty unleashed merciless vengeance. The law, enforcer and oppressor alike, showed no mercy for rebellion. Yet, amid the darkness of pain and despair, tales began to thread through the quarters, a whispered lineage where resistance refused to be snuffed out. Blood and ash, despair and hope intertwined in a fierce, fragile dance. Would you carry such a burden? To fight, to lose, to remember. In every whispered tale lurked the stubborn ember of rebellion, refused to yield, the story far from over. The flames had long since died, leaving only smoldering ruins beneath a night heavy with ash and sorrow. The plantation, once a place of looming control and whispered terror, now lay fractured, its big house scarred by fire and its social order shaken to the core. Yet, the fire that had burned with such fierce hope did not mark the end, but rather the brutal beginning of what would come. The colonel's family, embittered and enraged, unleashed reprisals swift and merciless. Whips cracked on bare backs, chains bit deeper, and the lash of fear spread fast as the cloying smoke. Men, women, and children suffered for the act of rebellion, some with no tie to the flames beyond the color of their skin and the dread of suspicion that engulfed all. Recorded tales and oral histories reveal a plantation gripped by tightening chains, not only of iron, but of law and silence. Laws once murmured about now screamed across the South, Slave codes grew harsher, freedoms disappeared, and social gatherings among enslaved people were outlawed. The right to carry tools, hunt for food, or earn a few coins was stripped away as the planter class doubled down in fear. The health and livelihoods of the enslaved deteriorated under these restrictions. The smallest acts of autonomy were branded crimes. Yet even in such darkness, the embers of rebellion glimmered persistently in whispered stories and secret prayers. The violence of reprisal could silence bodies, but not the spirit. The brutal crackdown revealed the grim paradox of resistance. The fight for freedom was met with terror to preserve bondage. The plantation itself became a crucible where trauma and resilience fused, each scar a testament to survival. Would you find the strength to bear such weight, knowing rebellion often summoned merciless fury? The tales of Hannah and that fiery night were carried forward in muted song and memory, an enduring echo that dared to challenge the very foundations of an unjust world. The fire she ignited would burn quietly in the hearts of many, a flame refused to be extinguished by chains, whip, or law. The conflicted figure of the plantation doctor stood at the threshold between two worlds, both healer and witness to the hidden wounds carved by cruelty. His hands, trained to mend flesh, often trembled as they traced new injuries, while his mind wrestled with the futility of soothing pains rooted in injustice. The iron scent of blood, mixed with herbs and unguents, filled his cluttered cabin, a pungent reminder of both hope and decay. He treated the lash marks and bruises left by overseers, painstakingly cleaning wounds infected by malicious neglect. Yet, in his heart, the doctor knew that no salve could touch the deeper affliction gnawing at the soul of the plantation. Amid the quiet hiss of boiling water and the muted scrape of hemp cloth, he grappled with questions not inscribed in any medical tome: how to heal when the very system of pain was maiming bodies and spirits alike. The medicine chest contained tinctures and poultices, camphor, sassafras, and red root, remedies passed down through whispered knowledge from enslaved ancestors. Records suggest the enslaved were skilled in their own healing arts, blending plant lore with ritual, often hidden from the plantation's suspicion. The doctor's presence was tolerated, but never trusted. His allegiance was tangled in chains as tightly as those he could not unbind. On the rare occasions when the colonel sought his counsel, it was a performance of control, a stark reminder of the hierarchy underpinning the fragile balance between life and death here. The cold light filtering through the grimy window pane cast long shadows on jars of bitter herbs, spectral sentinels watching over this uneasy alliance between the science of healing and the cruelty of submission. The doctor observed Hannah as she moved with an inner fire, her eyes quiet but fierce, sharply attuned to every flicker of danger. In moments when their paths crossed, he held back from judgment, recognizing a profound defiance that bore the weight of centuries. His voice, when it emerged, was measured and low, a contrast to the clamor of violence that roared outside. He was a man divided, part scientist, part reluctant witness to history's unfolding brutality. Could he justify tending to wounds inflicted by the same hands that brutalized patients? Did his care prolong a system doomed to collapse beneath its own violence? The question hung in the perfumed air like an unspoken curse. Would you stand at the crossroads between healer and enabler, caught between duty and conscience? In the fevered nights after the fire, the doctor's work intensified, not only healing bodies, but patching the fabric of a community frayed by trauma and fear. He treated not only physical agony, but the tremors of whispered nightmares, the psychological scars worn by those bound in chains and sorrow. Dark circles shadowed his once clear eyes, a silent testament to the cost borne by one caught on the margins of mercy. The plantation's pulse quickened with chaos, but within his cabin, a fragile stillness allowed for moments of reflection, moments when pain could speak softened and hope dared to root. The doctor understood the limits of flesh-bound healing in a world where freedom was the ultimate cure, bitterly elusive and fiercely fought for, in the spaces between suffering. Word count 700. The oppressive Mississippi summer sun pressed down relentlessly upon the sweltering plantation, saturating every corner of the land with a stifling heat that seemed to drain strength and hope alike. Beneath the rough-hewn floorboards of the kitchen, Hannah crouched quietly, her breath shallow and heart drumming a fierce rhythm she kept hidden. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and weathered cotton, and the distant hum of cicadas cut into the heavy silence like a warning. Around her, whispers of fear tangled with the brittle tension of a people bound yet yearning, whispers that spoke of dangers lurking just beyond the veil of routine. The grand silhouette of the big house loomed ahead, its white walls stark against a sky bruised by the approaching dusk, a cold symbol of command and cruelty. The kitchen's floorboards creaked beneath the weight of unspoken secrets, as hushed voices trembled in the humid air, carrying stories folded tight in fear and fierce determination. Beyond the cracked window panes, the sun's dying light slid over rows of cotton, stretching like fragile hopes into the horizon, their pale stalks rustling with an ominous whisper. In the distance, the faint clatter of a metal hinge teased the impending, an ominous note in a symphony of tension that simmered beneath cotton fields and cracked earth. To Hannah, the big house was a fortress of silent oppression, its shutters like blind eyes watching every movement, every breath of those trapped in its shadow. Would the coming night bring the release of shackles or the tightening of iron chains? Beneath the sweltering sky, every sound was amplified, the scrape of a whispered word, the brush of fabric against coarse wood, and each carried the weight of a precarious rebellion. Time seemed to elongate, each second a tether stretched thin across the simmering tension. The distant murmur of Colonel's men blended with the soft rustling of the enslaved, cautious footsteps walking the line between despair and hope. The scent of pine needles crushed underfoot, mixed with the molasses sweetness of ripe fruit, hanging heavy in the air, an unsettling reminder of life's persistence amid suffering. Beneath the floorboards, Hannah's fingertips grazed the rugged timber, their grain etched with years of silent endurance as she clung to the fragile promise of a plan sparked by rage and desperation. Would the flames she harbored within rise to burn a path toward freedom or consume all in their path? As dusk bled into an ink-stained night, thick shadows engulfed the plantation, swallowing light and sound alike. The big house stood like a silent sentinel, its windows shuttered as if to deny the horrors within. Hannah's silhouette slipped through the heavy air, each step deliberate, her body taut with a fierce resolve as she collected the hard iron chains and worn flint stones hidden beneath floorboards. The musky scent of burnt ash mingled with the earthy dampness of the evening, a tactile reminder of both ending and beginning. The night's quiet was a fragile veil, stretched thin, threatening to tear under the weight of whispered rebellion. What would rise from the ashes? Liberation, ruin, or a darkness deeper still? The plantation held its breath. Beyond the smoldering ruins and perilous nights, hope flickered in the form of secret pathways and whispered promises of escape. The underground networks known to many as the Underground Railroad stretched far beyond Mississippi's plantations, an intricate covert web of safe houses, sympathetic souls, and concealed routes threading toward freedom's elusive horizon. Though records imply that the Deep South offered some of the harshest conditions, the Mississippi River itself became a vital artery for those daring to flee. Its mighty currents carried more than just cotton and cargo. They bore the dreams of enslaved people yearning for liberty, who braved journeys fraught with peril to reach the promised land beyond the river's edge. The riverbanks were littered with caves and hidden hollows, secret sanctuaries where those fleeing bondage could rest. Concealed beneath the dark canopy of trees, the air hung heavy with the scent of pine resin and damp limestone, while occasional rustling and whispers merged with the river's steady murmur, nature's own soundtrack to fugitives' desperate flight. Conductors, those courageous guides who risked life and limb, wove through plantations disguised as slaves or workers, leading weary travelers under the moon's soft gaze. The routes followed tributaries and dense woodland, each station a frail beacon of safety carved into barns, basements, or hidden pockets known only to a trusted few. Would you dare navigate such shadows, trusting strangers and silence alike for the chance of freedom? Accounts speak softly of coded messages passed under breath, songs carrying hidden directions, and daring escapes timed with the North Star's steady glow. Each step taken was a gamble against discovery, yet the faintest glimmer of hope drove many forward. The journey was grueling, traveling 10 to 20 miles nightly, resting only in the safety of secret depots before pushing ever northwards. For those escaping from Mississippi's grip, the river was both a barrier and a bridge. Crossing it meant leaving behind homes marred by chains, but facing unknown dangers ahead. Yet the candlelight glowing from safehouse windows, the cautious smiles of abolitionists, and the promise of a world not bound by slavery kept the fire alive in countless hearts. The struggle and the flight were intertwined, echoes of a long tale where courage and desperation danced beneath the southern stars. In the sprawling network of escape routes weaving through the South, Mississippi's plantations were both prisons and gateways. The mighty Mississippi River, with its relentless currents and winding tributaries, served as a living artery of flight, a natural highway that liberty seekers used to navigate out of bondage. Records suggest the river was both a boundary and a bridge. Crossing it could mean liberation, but the journey was fraught with peril beneath the watchful eyes of slave catchers and hostile terrain. Along its banks, secret hides, caves chiseled into soft limestone, hollowed-out barns, and concealed rooms beneath humble homes offered fragile sanctuary to those fleeing chains under cover of darkness. Routes northward followed waterways and forest trails, guided by the stars and aided by brave conductors who, disguised as enslaved or laborers, escorted groups from station to station. Stations, safe houses, were often hidden in basements or behind false walls, each a fragile lifeline stretched taut across miles of hostile land. The station's keepers, risking lives and liberty, dispersed messages and directions in coded songs and gestures, sustaining hope where open rebellion was impossible. Would you dare trust strangers in whispered secrecy, praying the next stop would offer shelter and not a trap? Each night's march covered 10 to 20 miles, the traveler's eyes scanning for flickers of candlelight or the soft rustling of welcoming leaves. Though many routes crossed eastward into free states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, others followed the river southward or westward toward Texas and Mexico, where freedom came in many forms. For those fleeing Mississippi's plantations, the river was a deadly gauntlet and a final escape, its vastness both protective cloak and graveyard. Stories persist of fugitives stowing away beneath cargo on steamboats or slipping aboard ferries bound for northern ports, the river's endless flow, a silent accomplice to their flight. At river towns like Brownsville, hidden passages and caves whispered tales of sanctuary. Here, under the dense canopy and in cavernous shadows, the journey north toward freedom continued, each step a testament to unyielding courage and the desperate stakes of escape. Word count: 700. The oppressive Mississippi summer sun pressed down relentlessly upon the sweltering plantation, saturating every corner of the land with a stifling heat that seemed to drain strength and hope alike. Beneath the rough-hewn floorboards of the kitchen, Hannah crouched quietly, her breath shallow and heart drumming a fierce rhythm she kept hidden. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and weathered cotton, and the distant hum of cicadas cut into the heavy silence like a warning. Around her, whispers of fear tangled with the brittle tension of a people bound yet yearning, whispers that spoke of dangers lurking just beyond the veil of routine. The grand silhouette of the big house loomed ahead, its white walls stark against a sky bruised by the approaching dusk, a cold symbol of command and cruelty. The kitchen's floorboards creaked beneath the weight of unspoken secrets as hushed voices trembled in the humid air, carrying stories folded tight in fear and fierce determination. Beyond the cracked window panes, the sun's dying light slid over rows of cotton, stretching like fragile hopes into the horizon, their pale stalks rustling with an ominous whisper. In the distance, the faint clatter of a metal hinge teased the impending and ominous note in a symphony of tension that simmered beneath cotton fields and cracked earth. To Hannah, the big house was a fortress of silent oppression, its shutters like blind eyes watching every movement, every breath of those trapped in its shadow. Would the coming night bring the release of shackles or the tightening of iron chains? Beneath the sweltering sky, every sound was amplified, the scrape of a whispered word, the brush of fabric against coarse wood, and each carried the weight of a precarious rebellion. Time seemed to elongate, each second a tether stretched thin across the simmering tension. The distant murmur of Colonel's men blended with the soft rustling of the enslaved, cautious footsteps, walking the line between despair and hope. The scent of pine needles crushed underfoot mixed with the molasses sweetness of ripe fruit hanging heavy in the air, an unsettling reminder of life's persistence amid suffering. Beneath the floorboards, Hannah's fingertips grazed the rugged timber, their grain etched with years of silent endurance as she clung to the fragile promise of a plan sparked by rage and desperation. Would the flames she harbored within rise to burn a path toward freedom or consume all in their path? As dusk bled into an ink-stained night, thick shadows engulfed the plantation, swallowing light and sound alike. The big house stood like a silent sentinel, its windows shuttered as if to deny the horrors within. Hannah's silhouette slipped through the heavy air, each step deliberate, her body taut with a fierce resolve as she collected the hard iron chains and worn flint stones hidden beneath floorboards. The musky scent of burnt ash mingled with the earthy dampness of the evening, a tactile reminder of both ending and beginning. The night's quiet was a fragile veil stretched thin, threatening to tear under the weight of whispered rebellion. What would rise from the ashes? Liberation, ruin, or a darkness deeper still? The plantation held its breath. Harriet Tubman, often called Moses for her determined leadership, remains the most famous conductor of the Underground Railroad. Born into slavery as Araminta Ross around 1820 in Maryland, she endured brutal hardships but escaped in 1849, gaining her freedom. Yet, Tubman's story did not end there. With fierce courage and unyielding faith, she returned repeatedly to the South, risking capture and death to guide hundreds of enslaved people north to freedom. Her journeys were marked by ingenuity, singing coded songs, reading stars as guides, and using secret routes to navigate hostile territory. Tubman understood each escape as a perilous but sacred mission, a defiance against chains, both physical and spiritual. Not merely a guide, Tubman was a strategist who worked closely with abolitionists and allies along the route, coordinating safe houses, known as stations, and recruiting trusted conductors to shelter and move escapees. Her success was extraordinary. Across nearly 2 decades, she reportedly led over 300 people to freedom without losing a single passenger. Tubman's resilience stemmed not only from her knowledge of terrain and terrain, but from an unbreakable spirit shaped by years of suffering and visions she believed sent by divine guidance. Her example inspired countless others to join the fight, carving a path for freedom that transcended her own journeys. Would you find the strength to return endlessly to the heart of danger for the promise of another's liberation? In addition to her work as a conductor, Tubman later served as a nurse, spy, and scout for the Union Army during the Civil War, continuing her fight against slavery through different means. Her legacy reveals the multifaceted resistance of enslaved people and allies, a blend of courage, faith, and tactical brilliance that defied the crippling structures of bondage. Tubman's story, passed down through oral histories and evolving archives, remains a beacon of hope and defiance, proof that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can chart a course toward freedom. Her life challenges us to consider the true cost of liberty and the indomitable will needed to claim it. Harriet Tubman's legacy is woven through the fabric of American history as a testament to extraordinary courage and unyielding resolve. Over a decade, Tubman conducted more than 300 enslaved people along the Underground Railroad, guiding them to freedom with unwavering determination and strategic brilliance. Known as Moses among her people, she earned this revered title for her unparalleled commitment to liberation, repeatedly risking her life to lead others out of bondage. Her journeys spanned hedgerows, river crossings, and shadowed forest trails, each marked by careful planning and coded songs that carried secret messages of hope. Tubman famously declared, "I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger," an affirmation of her tireless vigilance and leadership. Beyond her role as a conductor, Tubman was a multifaceted activist. During the Civil War, she spent time as a nurse, cook, and spy for the Union Army, a rare and dangerous extension of her fight against slavery. She played a pivotal role in the Combahee River Raid of 1863, collaborating with Colonel James Montgomery to free over 700 enslaved people from plantations in South Carolina, many of whom would later join the Union forces. Her efforts extended into post-war activism, championing women's suffrage and civil rights until her death in 1913. The land she purchased in Auburn, New York, became a refuge for freed people, a lasting testament to her commitment to community and justice. Harriet Tubman's impact resonates far beyond the immediate outcomes of her daring missions. Her story disrupts narratives of passive slavery by highlighting resistance, leadership, and agency. She remains a symbol not only of the perilous journey from bondage to freedom, but also of the persistent fight for human dignity and equality. As America contemplates placing her likeness on the $20 bill, Tubman's life invites ongoing reflection on courage, sacrifice, and the enduring quest for justice across generations. Would you bear such burden to return again and again to the heart of danger, lighting the path for others to walk into the dawn?